Hi, this is Mrs. Rodolfi, and this is part 3 of the Unit 1 study guide video. I'm going to be going over the constructed response practice for number 23. So for this one, the directions say, show your work or explain your reasoning with words. Be sure to address every part of the question. So you're going to be having constructed responses on the LEAP test and on every unit test in Algebra 1. And so we want to go through some strategies to help you be successful. And then we also created, Mrs. Gallant and I, created this constructed response checklist to make sure you are answering it fully and have all the elements necessary to get full points. So I'll be referencing this checklist throughout, and we'll be using this throughout the semester. So make sure you have both of these on hand so that you can check your own work. So for this one, let's go through and read the prompt. So we'll start with the first two checklists. I read the prompt thoroughly. I annotated the prompt using highlighting, cubes, etc. So let's read the prompt and annotate it with cubes. So Jocelyn earns money working part-time at a grocery store. This table shows the amounts of money that she earns for working different number of hours. So for this one, we have the key numbers in the table, but I'm not going to go through and circle all of those because there's no key numbers in the prompt. We're going to underline the question once we get to part A, but up here, we can at least box some math action words to help us. So we know she earns money working a part-time job at a grocery store. We know the table shows the amounts of money that she earns for working different number of hours. All right, then part A, explain why the information in the table is a proportional relationship. As part of your explanation, determine the amount in dollars Jocelyn earns per hour. Show your work. So there's usually always multiple components to each prompt given or each part. So let's go through and put a box around those action words and underline what it's telling us to do, since we need to underline the question in cubes. So it's telling us to explain, and then I'm going to underline why the information in the table is proportional relationship. As part of your explanation, determine, that's another verb, the amount in dollars Jocelyn earns per, per hour. Show your work. So since we have 3 different verbs, we pretty much have 3 different elements that we need to address in here. So I'm going to kind of put a number next to them. All right, so then going back here, I addressed all elements in the problem. List the verbs below. So let's just list them so we have them on our checklist. So we need to, so explain was one of the verbs. And we're explaining why it's a proportional relationship. It's really important to make sure you understand what it's asking you to do so you can make sure you're answering it correctly. All right, then it's as part of the explanation, it wants us to determine the amount Jocelyn earns per hour, and then show your work. So you might not always have to fill out each box here. So this is 3 components on this one. All right, so then let's start showing our work to figure these out, and then we can write our response. So first we want to explain why it's proportional. So going back to a proportional relationship, it means that it has equivalent ratios. Another thing that helps us know that is if we graphed it, it would start at the origin, 0, 0. So in order to find the proportions, if we're talking about a proportional relation, so m equals slope, and it's the change in y over the change in x. So like if I look at this first column in the table, the earnings are the y, that's $17.50, $17.50. and that's for 2 hours. So if I create a ratio, I would do 17.50 over 2. And then I would divide that, and that would give me 8.75. So if for 2 hours she's earning $17.50, then for 1 hour, remember, any number is always over 1 if it's given on its own. So that's $8.75 per hour. Now, to be proportional, they would all of the ratios in the table would have to equal 8.75. So we could look at the next column, 35 divided by 4. 8.75. 61.25 divided by 7. 8.75. And then you could keep going to make sure, so we wouldn't have to show it all on the paper, but let's just double check in our calculator. Divided by 9, 105 divided by 12. So they all are equivalent ratios. So when we are explaining, let's restate the question. Going back to the checklist, I restated the question, my answer. This will help you make sure that you are actually answering it fully. So restate it, so it's asking why it's a proportional relationship. So I would say the information in the table is a proportional relationship because all of the ratios are equivalent, which also shows the graph would start at the origin. If she worked 0 hours, she would make $0. So I restated that first part of the question, and I gave my explanation. All right, so that's only part 1. Now part 2, determine the amount in dollars she earns per hour. Well, when we were calculating our ratios and simplifying them, they were all equal to $8.75 per hour. So then again, to restate it, Jocelyn earns $8.75 per hour. And then it says show your work. Well, above I showed my work. I have my ratios. I show that they're all equal to $8.75. So that has my work shown. All right, so then I can go back to the checklist. I read the prompt thoroughly. I annotated. I restated the question, my answer. I addressed all elements in the problem. All right, then I boxed any numerical solutions. So in this one, you know, it's not like solving for X or anything. Like, I know I have 8.75 per hour, but it's more part of my verbal answer. So in this case, that would be more if, you know, you're having to show like solving an equation or something. So we can just check that. My response makes sense for the question that was asked. It makes sense that she would make $8.75 per hour. You know, if you're getting some outlandish number that wouldn't make sense in the context, like make sure, like, does this make sense in the context? Yes, it could make sense that she makes $8.75 per hour. So this makes sense. I supported my answer by showing work, explaining my steps. I did show my work up here. I double checked my answer for accuracy. So always go back and just make sure you typed in correctly. So I know a 17.5 divided by 2. Yep, 8.75. 35 divided by 4. So I would go back, type it in your calculator again, double check, read over it, make sure it makes sense. So all looks good there, looks accurate. And then make sure your response is neatly written so someone else can read it. I believe mine is legible, so I'm going to check that off. All right, then part B. So now let's use another checklist. All right, so Kate also has a part-time job. After working X hours, she earns Y dollars. Her total earnings can be described by the equation Y equals 8.50X. So box math action words. So after working X hours, she earns Y dollars. Her total earnings can be described by the equation Y equals 8.50X. All right, now let's cube the prompt. Explain why Jocelyn's total earnings will always be greater than Kate's total earnings when Jocelyn and Kate work the same hours. So explain is a verb. Why Jocelyn's total earnings will always be greater than Kate's total earnings. This is important. I'm going to box that. If it's in bold, we really need to pay attention to that. That's telling us that, this is important. So why it's greater than Kate's total earnings when Jocelyn and Kate work the same hours. So we've done similar prompts. Like if you recognize this is similar to the one you did in the diagnostic recently. And a lot of times when I'm grading those, I notice a lot of students will make a comment, well, because they're working a different amount. Be careful and make sure you're reading the prompt thoroughly because it says they're working the same hours. So that just shows me that students are not reading it completely. So just a reminder, always make sure you read it thoroughly. So I read the prompt thoroughly. I annotated the prompt using highlighting cubes. All right, now let's go down here to the elements. So it says to explain why Jocelyn's earnings are greater than Kate's. And then that's a one-part prompt, okay? Just always make sure it just says when Jocelyn and Kate work the same hours. So we just have to explain why her total earnings will be greater. Well, remember, this is part B, so this still relates to what we already talked about in part A with Jocelyn. So we know that Jocelyn earns $8.75 per hour. And now, given the equation, if Kate's equation is y equals 8.50x, that's showing that, we know x equals the number of hours up here after working x hours. So if the coefficient is 8.50, that means she's making $8.50 per hour. So Kate earns $8.50 per hour. So let's answer. So explain why Jocelyn's total earnings will always be greater. So Jocelyn's total earnings, so again, restate the question, will always be greater than Kate's because Jocelyn earns, oops, I'm not meaning to put a period there. Jocelyn earns $8.75 per hour, where Kate earns less with $8.50 given the slope in the equation. All so now let's go back to the checklist. I restated the question and my answer. Yes, I addressed all the elements. So explain why Jocelyn's earnings. I did. I explained and I compared. I boxed in numerical solutions. Again, this is more of just a verbal answer, so I can just check that off because we don't really need to do that. My response makes sense for the question that was asked. Yes, Jocelyn makes $8.75. Kate earns $8.50. Makes sense. I supported my answer by showing work explaining. Now in here, it just says explain why, but I did explain, because I said that Kate earns less because it was given the slope in the equation, so I did support it. So I would suggest always supporting it because you could still maybe get partial points if you show some knowledge of the concept. So I would say always show work, explain your steps, because usually that is a component they ask for. I double checked my answer for accuracy. Okay, so I already double checked the 8.75 in part A. I know, so looking back at the equation, always look back, make sure you wrote it down the same. It's easy to make those little mistakes. So always double check that you wrote the same number. Sometimes I see students accidentally type in or write the wrong number. My response is neatly written so that someone else can read it. Yes, I feel like that is legible. All right, so now we have answered this and completed our checklist. So now it would be ready to submit. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.